Welcome to our third session of the five-part Marketing from Scary to Attainable webinar series. It explores the different components of developing a plan with guidance from library system communications and marketing consultants in our southeastern Wisconsin SUI Libraries region, which includes Bridges, Kenosha County, Milwaukee County Federated, Monarch, and Prairie Lakes Library Systems. I'm Emily Heller, the Public Communications Coordinator at Bridges Library System.
And I'm Deb Merritt, the Public Information Coordinator for the Milwaukee County Federated Library System. Oh, is that the end? Sorry.
Take it away.
Take it away. Hi, everybody. So today we are on our third session for creating your marketing plan. And today we're going to be talking about actually creating the plan, which is going to be your roadmap for proceeding with your marketing. So we're just going to quickly review what we've covered before. In the first two sessions, we've talked about the steps that really you're going to be going through before you're ready to sit down and create the plan. So you have worked on identifying your target audiences, identifying the needs of those audiences, which will help you create programming that's relevant and that will meet their needs, and talking about setting measurable goals for your marketing plans for each segment of it, of how basically setting up how you can define whether something has been successful or not. So this week we are up to the what. We've talked about the why and the who, and this week is all about the actual getting into probably what you've been thinking about all along when it comes to creating a marketing plan. Now we're into where you're going to start taking some action on these things. So today we're going to talk about identifying and finding your audience, researching the demographic trends that go along with your identified audience, brainstorming possible venues and vehicles to get your message out. And then we're going to talk about planning your budget and then creating your messaging. So we're going to start with your audience. And you've already done your research and you've learned a little bit about who they are in your community and what your community may need. And when you start to look at marketing, now you have to think about, if you're sending messaging out there, where are the people hanging out where they're going to see your messaging or hear your messaging? And you have to think about that in terms of demographics as too, because it changes depending on who you're targeting. So the first thing you need to do is find where they are and think about what kind of messaging they're going to respond to. And our example here is the difference between teens and adults and seniors. Right now, we know that young people are hanging out on TikTok and they're going to want some kind of crazy over the top kind of messaging coming from people that will get their attention, potentially make them share it and comment on it. And we know that if you want an older audience, you're going to want to look at things like Facebook, which is not where the teens are hanging out today. That's going to be Gen X, seniors, and things like that. So when you start to research that, Google is always where you're going to start. You guys are librarians, you know how to do your research, but I did want to make sure that everyone's aware of this. This is a really important thing. The world of marketing changes fast, and what was true not too long ago may have changed by the time you're ready to do something with it. So the important thing when you're doing any kind of research online is to set a time parameter. So if you're in Google, you can go all the way over to the right on the top where it says tools. And then the thing that will pop up is that anytime, all results, advanced search. When you click on anytime and you get that drop-down menu for marketing stuff, if you just go with the past year, that should be pretty good and still pretty relevant. If you don't set that time parameter, you might be seeing information that's too outdated to really be of good use to you. When you start to think about where you want to send out your messaging, I would encourage you to do a really big brainstorming session. This is a fun thing to do with more than one person because Two heads and three heads and more are better than one. So this session is going to be anything and everything is worth thinking about or at least writing down. Nothing is off the table in this session. So you're going to just start by identifying, pie in the sky or not, write down every possible way that you could send your message out that would hit your community and your demographic audience that you're trying to hit. And so I've identified what I'm calling internal and external possibilities for that. Internal things are going to be mostly free or low cost. It's going to be a lot of stuff that you've already got set up. So your social media accounts, obviously, your website, your email newsletter, posters in the library, things like that. It's always good to consider what connections you may have, especially like people on your board who may be local business owners, who might be willing to, kind of extend your reach through their businesses, things like that. And what resources you might have tied to your city, because a lot of times, like the city will put out a newsletter that they would be willing to include your information on, things like that. So write down everything. I would keep this as a separate list, this internal list of things that you could get through referrals or connections, and that really generally would not cost you much, if anything at all, if you were doing that. And then you're going to move on to external possibilities. And these are probably going to come with a cost, whether that's large or small. And again, it doesn't have to be huge, but then we're going to talk about, you're talking about perhaps printing things, sending out postcards where you might have printing and postage costs, advertising outside of the library in using signs or billboards. We do stuff on buses, obviously. You can go really big with this, radio, TV. But there are things like the schools, when they do a school play, they put that playbill book together. That's cheap advertising, and it's going to be seen by a lot of people right in your community. Other things like that, parks and rec programs are great. Other community events that you can tie in with, things like that. So again, nothing's off the table at this stage. You're just going to make a big list of anything that's possible that you might be able to find out about. And then once you've got that list, and this is why you want to have a big long list. You're not going to use everything, but what you do want to do is consider multiple ways to get your message out there, because you have to spread yourself a little wider than in order to hopefully reach more people. And repetition is important too. So whether they see a message in one place or multiple times in different places, it all kind of counts, because one of the rules of marketing that we tend to live by is that repetition is key. And research has shown that generally someone needs to see something an average of 7 times before they'll remember it without having to see it again, or before taking action on it. So we tend to think, I put it out on social media, it's done. You need to post it multiple times. You need to put it in more than one place. And, so it's in the library, it's in your newsletter, it's on social media, repeated a couple of times, things like that. That's all necessary because not everybody sees it every time. So just repetition is your friend. So once you're going with the free options, here are some of those possibilities for you to think of. Probably you're doing a lot of them already, but that's probably where you're going to start. I know a lot of libraries aren't going to have a large budget for doing a marketing campaign, especially if it's for rather than a general marketing campaign for the whole library, maybe it's just for one particular program that you're running. You're not going to have necessarily a lot to work with. So those are the times you're going to be really turning to these free options, but really make use of them. It doesn't have to just be, posted on social media and be done. Really make use of every option you have. And it takes a little more legwork, but it's going to pay off in the end by seeing larger participation numbers and larger engagement. So talking about marketing, or sorry, I'm talking about budgeting, and knowing that this might be a little tricky for a library. I think libraries are not always in the habit of considering a marketing budget. And that's something that we're trying to change because I think it's very important. And so what we want to look at is as you're starting to put a program together, for example, you're starting a new program series or lecture series, and you may have a small budget to work with. You need to plan a little bit of that for marketing, even if it's a very small amount. Give yourself something to work with and build it right into the budget from the start, especially if you're putting together a budget and then you have to present it for approval. Put some marketing into it right from the start, because otherwise, very well, it's just going to be gone, right? So in the corporate world, when we talk about marketing budgets and kind of across the board averages, in the corporate world, B2B stands for business to business. Generally, over the whole year's budget, we would tend to put in 2 to 5% of that budget to go to marketing. In business to consumer, it's going to be bigger. It's going to be 5 to 10%. And that's really what libraries are, because we are reaching consumer would just be like general public, at least that's where your starting point is. And that's what a library is doing. So whether you can actually do that or not, I understand that, but it's a good goal, and that might be something that has to get built up to over time as libraries get used to that kind of thing. But it's good to just keep in mind that you definitely want to put a little chunk away for yourself to help out. So once you've got all of that information, that list that you brainstormed, now from there, you're going to start a spreadsheet, and this is going to be your master list going forward. You're only going to have to do this big part of the project once. So you're going to put in a spreadsheet, identify everything, and then you're going to go through and you're going to, for each of the external sources where you're going to need to find out what it costs, you're going to call them, get some ballpark quotes. If it's a printer or something like that, it's going to be specific to that project, but give them a ballpark of how many things you're going to want to print, and just it will help you for the future to know, if nothing else, which printer is more expensive than another, what is a better resource. And don't forget, the online printers like Vistaprint tend to get really good pricing, but not always. We have a press here in the city that actually usually beats Vistaprint for smaller runs. So check out your local sources as well. Once you have all of that and all those numbers, then you're in a position to evaluate and actually pick and choose what you're going to use. So then that becomes your master list. The numbers obviously would need to get updated with each project, but it gives you a great starting point for the foreseeable future now that you've got that put together. So once you have all of that put in, that's kind of all that research that you've done. Now you're finally ready to sit down and actually create your marketing messaging. And so messaging is going to include the visual messaging, which is going to be photography, the design elements, video work you might do, and the actual written messages, which is perhaps the name of the project. You might give it a tagline. You might do some branding and give it its own name, its identity. So you're going to put this together. And the content that you're going to want to focus on and that you can create separately, because it's going to get shared through all of the pieces that you do, you're going to start to figure out, and these are the things that you're going to need to include in everything you put out. And the first thing, and I've put it large and bold because it's actually surprisingly easy to forget, to put in a call to action. We tend to put in, we're doing this, here's the date and time. We can't, it's gonna be great, but we forget to say, click here to learn more, click here to sign up, call us, come into the library, whatever you want them to do. Even if it's come on this day, give them an action word, because it does something in the brain that makes them be a little more prone to take action. So along with that inclusion, you're going to have obviously a bold headline, and you're going to think of it as if someone is looking at this who has no idea what your program is, what the thing is that you're trying to tell them about, something that's going to hopefully catch their eye, make them want to keep reading the rest of it. And then the clear messaging. And this is where, in pretty much any marketing thing you're going to do, you're going to keep this very short and sweet. Bullet points are great. 2 paragraphs of text is not great. That's for your website. In general, marketing is all external marketing, social media, billboards, posters, everything else. You want to send them to your website, because that's where you're going to put in all the information. You can write to your heart's content. The marketing part of it is just to get their attention to go look and get the more information. So keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it, like it's about getting their attention and using that hook. You're going to use your logo, put in contact information, use imaging that will catch their attention, make it look like fun. Usually, obviously, you're going to think about, if you are doing something for older people, you're going to use pictures of older people. You're going to match up your demographics to the imaging that you're using in your marketing. This is one thing that drives me crazy on social media. I see tons of stuff that sounds really cool, and there is no message about city and state of where it's located. You have to remember that social media is global, and someone from Australia might come across your message and might might need to know that you're not in their vicinity. So, especially on social media, you're going to use, obviously, day, date, time, include the city and state, so that people will not have to go searching too far to figure out whether it applies to them or not. And then the really important thing too is, if you're doing more than one thing, if you're using it, if you're using repetition, or if you're using messaging in multiple places, you want to give it a similar look and feel so that it's instantly recognizable of this library, this particular project maybe of this library, and things, so that you start to kind of build a little branding around it. So I know a lot of people are not graphic designers by trade, and now you're being asked to do some graphic design work, which you can do now with Canva, especially, and things like that. But in Canva, it can set up nice templates for you, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to always come out looking great. So I just wanted to give a little bit of design principles to kind of keep in mind as you're putting your things together. And the kind of the rule you want to live by is, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. You've got, oh, I can make this glow, I can make this do this, I can put drop shadows everywhere, and it can get real overwhelming looking really fast, and it can get really cluttered. So simplicity is good. Um, a little restraint is good. So some guidelines that will be helpful are, don't use more than 2 fonts, generally speaking. Sometimes you can sneak a third one in there, but a lot of times what we'll do is one font for the big headlines and another font for the smaller text, and just do that. Obviously, your logo or something like that will have a font of its own. That doesn't count, but just inside of your messaging. And then you want to use what we would call hierarchy sizing, meaning the big, most important things are bigger, the less important things are smaller. Because if someone's only going to read 1 or 2 things, you want to call attention to the 1 or 2 things that you really need them to see. Another really common mistake I see is people will take text or images right up to the edge of the paper. That is a problem if it's going out for printing, because it actually might get cut off, and it also just doesn't look professional. So you want to leave yourself a border around the edges. That's not including a colored background that might go off the edge. I'm talking about text or images. You don't want to run them right up to the edge. And then we have a rule that we call no kissing, and that is 2 things that come right to touch each other, but they don't overlap, and they're just exactly touching each other. It's actually a makes it look amateur. Again, you want to give everything its space. Like I said, overlapping is fine, but you don't want them right up against each other. And just in general, as I've been saying, don't fall into the trap of feeling like you need to fill every square inch of space. Let everything have, we call it white space, where there's just nothing there, and that's okay. Negative space, let everything breathe. So here's a little bit of an example of that, of things, and you can see the difference. The content is the same, the design is actually very similar, but I went a little crazy with the stuff on the left. You can see how things come right up to the edge of stuff and don't overlap, and how everything is kind of the same size on that one on the left. So you're not really sure where you're supposed to look first and what's the most important thing on that poster versus the one on the right where everything has its space. We've got a hierarchy of sizing of, if I was only going to look at the one or two things, obviously I'd look at the headline, grow your business, and then I'd look at that best services list because there's my tiny little bullet list that's easy to skim. And I may or may not actually then read that text at the other side. It depends on if the rest of it has caught my interest enough. So those are some good things to follow. Canva does give you nice templates to work with like this. And if you stick with what they've given you, you'll be pretty good. I've seen people take those templates and, pull the text out of it and make it bigger, and it hasn't come out looking as good. So just if you can stick with what they've given you, it's better to edit your text down than to cram it all in. And then with talking about having things look similarly, here's some examples from a campaign that my system is running for our online learning resources. So I've developed this look and feel that gets used no matter what I'm doing. So the ones on the left were big posters. The ones on the right were social media posts. The one on the bottom was a little web banner that got done. So you can see the common elements that I chose to do all the way through. So this becomes, if you've seen one or two of these and then you see a third, you already know what it's about because you've seen the others. I've developed a branded look to this campaign, so it gives a really cohesiveness to it. It looks very professional, but it also helps people identify the next time they see it, they start to feel familiar with it. You can all this minute picture the Nike logo in your heads. You can picture the Coca-Cola logo in your heads, and that's because they've used them for years and years and years. They have not gotten bored and changed them. Don't fall into that trap. Just let it run because people like that kind of consistency and recognizability. So when you're going to be developing all of this, there are tools that you're going to need. So you're going to need, a lot of times you're going to need your design software. I know most people are using Canva. Obviously, there's the Adobe Creative Suite if that's something that you have training in. And just so you're aware, if that's something you are hoping your library might invest in, you're going to need to invest in some training as well. Those programs are not always super intuitive. They're very powerful. But you're going to need to learn to use them, and it's worth it, but it's going to be part of that process. CapCut and iMovie are two great free video editing pieces that are out there. There are others. I'm just giving you a couple examples for some of these things. Stock photography is so useful. I highly recommend using it, finding a website, one of these websites that works well with you. Personally, here at McFliss, I use freepick.com. It's something like $170 a year. It gives me actually video clips, photography, illustrations. It's really broad and it's high quality stuff. There are certainly others. Some are more expensive than others. You're just gonna need to do some research and find what works well for you. I do want to point out, in case nobody's aware, and as librarians you should be, but you can't use images that you just pull off of a random website. There are still copyright laws, even though people abuse them wildly these days. You can't do that. And the other reason for that is that when you are working in print, you have to have things at higher resolution than you'll get pulling an image off a website. So you need to be aware of that. So just don't break the law for us, and make sure you're doing everything the right way. You may or may not have played yet with some of the AI tools that are out there now. ChatGTP will generate pretty nice text. You have to be pretty specific with your request of what you're telling it to do, but it really does a great job. And I've never used it just straight up, taken what it wrote for me and use it, but it gives you a great starting point. And sometimes it's just easier to edit something than to come up with it completely from scratch. And since time is always going to be an issue, it can be a really big time saver if you need to write something up. So that's something I would recommend you look into as well. If your library allows it, that's the other thing to be aware of. So with all of that, we need to start to look at what your next steps are going to be, given all of this information that you have gotten from us so far. And that is, you've identified your audience, you've done your research to find out which audience is in your community, what they need for your programming. And then you're going to start doing what we've talked about today as far as brainstorming venues for where your messaging can go. You're going to figure out what that might all cost you, and then you're going to see what you can afford. You're going to plan a budget, and you're going to, even if it's, social media, you're always going to come back to social media because you can run a campaign for $1 a day if you want to. And that's better than not at all. It's, do what you can do, and just make the best use you can. And then you're going to start working on pieces of your messaging, get your text written, get photography done. You're going to work on whatever you need to do as far as like I was saying, if you're sending everybody to your web page, get that all set up and ready to go. And then once you've got that all put together, you're going to start creating all of those pieces. You're going to think about the ads, flyers, bookmarks, obviously, social media posts, everything else that you might be able to do to get your messaging out. And then I've put together a list of resources here, and it's a little bit of a mix. I grabbed some information about marketing, like I was talking about, to specific age groups. And these couple of websites are talking about the trends that are happening on, in graphic design. Design has trends that it follows, just like fashion, interior design. Graphic design has trends it follows as well, as far as popular colors to use, certain look and feel to things that might be interesting for you to take a look at. And just some of the other resources like stock photography places and things like that. These are clickable links, and this whole presentation will get posted on our website that we're using for this. So you can always go here to get to these resources. So we're going to talk about, our next session is going to be with myself and Tova, where we're going to be talking about actually implementing the plan, where you're going to take all of this and develop strategies and set up a timeline to get everything put together in the time that you need it to be done. So now we're going to have time for a Q&A. I think that Lori